Hi, welcome back to Detective Story. I'm Mike Hammond. Thank you very much for joining in. I hope you're all doing well, all good on this end. I really appreciate you being here with us again or for the first time. If this is your first episode, it makes me feel great and I hope you enjoy it. Today, we are lucky enough to have another guest on the show. We have featured several guests by now, and I'm very proud of being able to interview each one, and today is no exception. We have with us today the incredible LaDonna Humphrey. In the interest of time, I'll not even try and give you the full scope of LaDonna's resume that she has put together in one lifetime, but here's a quick synopsis. LaDonna and her husband are the parents of 7 children. So I could stop there, right? And that would be pretty impressive enough, parenting 7 children. But that's not all, of course. She's an award-winning documentarian, investigative journalist, and the writer and producer of the documentary, of Uneven Ground, the Melissa Witt Story. LaDonna is also the executive director of the Oasis of Northwest Arkansas, a women's treatment and health center. She is the co-founder of All the Lost Girls Foundation, a group that focuses specifically on cold case homicides of women who have been strangled and murdered, and serves as a clearinghouse nationwide of cases of that order to assist the families of the victims and law enforcement with resolution. She is the host of several podcasts, including the Deep Dark Secrets podcast, the Legends in Blue podcast, the Extinguished podcast, and the Roommate podcast. And she is the published author of the books The Girl I Never Knew and Connected by Fate. That's just kind of the start. I'll let you tell you in her own words all that she has going on, and I don't expect you to remember everything. I'll have her accomplishments listed in my show notes for your perusal at your convenience. Today, we're going to focus on specifically her documentary, Uneven Ground, the Melissa Witt story. Melissa Witt was a 19-year-old woman who, on December 1st, 1994, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, went missing. About 6:30 that evening, December 1st, 1994, Melissa was to meet her mother at a bowling alley in Fort Smith there. She did not show, and by later in the evening, her mother was very concerned, as that was outside of her normal behavior to not show up. And by later that evening, she had alerted the police and had volunteers from her community out looking for Melissa. Detectives were made aware of what was going on and got involved themselves pretty quickly, and they were able to find Melissa's car in the parking lot of the bowling alley there in Fort Smith. To their concern, they found blood near her car, which turned out to be Melissa's blood, and articles of clothing, I think jewelry. And so they knew something bad was up. There was an exhaustive search for Melissa that included a lot of press coverage, a lot of people out looking for her, all of it to no avail until, sadly, 45 days later, approximately on January 13th of 1995, just after the new year, her body was found by hunters in the Ozark National Forest, about 50 miles from where she'd gone missing in the bowling alley there in Fort Smith. Her death was ruled to be a homicide, strangulation. There's a lot that went into all of that, and we'll get into that. I highly recommend the documentary. It's on Amazon Prime as of the recording of this show. Again, that's Uneven Ground, the Melissa Witt story. If you're a true crime fan, I'm assuming you probably are. If you're here, you'll find it very interesting, I think, and a captivating story. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview with Miss LaDonna Humphrey. Please welcome her and enjoy. Hi, this is Mike Hammond. Let's take a moment from our regular programming for a real talk about safety and security. I want to introduce you to Blue Knight Security Solutions. Yep,
Knight, like King Arthur's court. Your ultimate partner in protection. Blue Knight Security Solutions isn't just your average security company. They are a team of elite detectives, investigators, and law enforcement professionals with unparalleled expertise. Especially in this realm, I wouldn't vouch for just anyone, but I confidently endorse Blue Knight because I have seen their skills firsthand. Whether you need real world investigative prowess or comprehensive security measures for your business, synagogue, church, school, or any gathering place you feel at risk, Blue Knight Security Solutions has you covered. From risk assessment to tailored security plans, they'll ensure your safety is priority number one. So, if you're in need of real safety, contact Blue Knight Security Solutions today at 773 706 4920 or visit BlueKnightSecuritySolutions.com. Again, Knight like the round table, BlueKnightSecuritySolutions.com. Tell them I sent you.
Let's welcome LaDonna Humphrey. LaDonna, I might guess know a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for allowing me to come on the show today. I'm really excited about this interview and honored to be here. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's our honor.
And I am excited to talk about, obviously, the work that I've been doing. First and foremost, I am a wife and a mom. I have 7 kids. So that's, kind of always shock and awe to some people.
Yeah.
Like 7 kids.
It's outstanding.
I do run a sober living home for women in Northwest Arkansas, where I live, and I've been doing that for just over 6 years. Very passionate about that work. Really want to try to help give back and help these women, rebuild and reclaim their lives. So that's what my day job is. But I'm also, on top of that, I am a true crime author. I've written 3 books, 2 that are still out in circulation, which is The Girl I Never Knew and Connected by Fate. I'm also a true crime podcaster. I have 2 podcasts. Is it okay if I mention those?
No, please do. Please do. I'm sorry that I did not. So yes,
no,
please.
That's okay.
And you have a website as well. So go ahead and talk about that, please.
Sure. My podcasts there's 2 of them. I have Deep Dark Secrets, and my co-host is Amy Smith. We talk about typically, taboo, lesser known type topics, or deep dive into cases and information that maybe other podcasts aren't covering. This season, we're talking pretty extensively about human trafficking, just really doing a deep dive into different aspects there. And then I also have the Extinguished podcast with David McClam, and it's a long form type podcast. And every month, over 4 episodes, we cover one case. So yeah, I stay pretty busy.
Sounds like it. That's awesome. And I really love the topic, the subject matter, and how dedicated you are to all of it. That's important stuff.
Well, thank you. And as you know, podcasting is not easy. And so, I like to try to collaborate and, be a guest on people's shows and ask them to come on my show and get to know people and work with people, because there's a lot of great podcasters out there like yourself. So it's rewarding work for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned work. I just had no idea until I got started in this, how much work it was. It's amazing. I mean, and I'm retired from the police department. I still do little bitty things here and there when my friends need help with, private eye type stuff. But this is a full-time job, just putting together this podcast. And like you said, I get asked to be on a lot of podcasts, and I enjoy that. It's good, not only good exposure, I enjoy just the interaction with people. But yeah, my calendar's full. It's amazing. It's great. Yeah.
Well, thanks for squeezing me in. I do appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Didn't mean it that way, but yeah, no, I'm
honored. I was excited to be on the show. So I sincerely mean that.
No, well, me too. So let's get to the meat of the matter. So when I first encountered your biography, what drew me to it was that you're a documentarian, and you had done this film for, which is now, I don't know if you did it for them, but it is available on Amazon Prime, and Uneven Ground. the Melissa Witt Story. And it's a captivating film about this young woman in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, that was attacked and kidnapped, basically. She was missing for 45 days. And then she was ultimately, unfortunately, found murdered in the Arkansas National Forest. I'm really super paraphrasing there, but because I want to give us time to get into it. But first, could you just tell me how you got drawn to this, Melissa's case?
Yeah, so I've always known about the case. So I'm going to tell the story. There's a lot to it, but I grew up in Southwest. Yeah, sure. I grew up in Southwest Oklahoma. I moved to Arkansas into the Greenwood, River Valley, Fort Smith area my 7th grade year, so mid-'80s. I only lived there a year, and then I moved to Northwest Arkansas. And so interestingly enough, during that time, I actually made a lot of close friends with people who would later go on and end up being close friends with Melissa Witt, which is just interesting because Melissa and I, we never met. But, I moved to Northwest Arkansas. I grew up. I always had an interest in true crime, ever since I can remember. And I remember specifically when Melissa was missing. I remember watching it on the news and seeing it all unfold. And then, fast forward many years later, I was the founder of a nonprofit called Let's Bring Them Home, and we ran that nonprofit for about a decade and a half. And essentially, we offered services to families that had missing adults. And when it was time for that nonprofit to really kind of cease functioning because our mission was no longer needed, there was a government database called NamUs that came into play, and we didn't need to exist anymore. And our team decided that we wanted to finish off this decade and a half with a documentary. And in my mind, it was going to be about the plight of missing adults, specifically in the state of Arkansas. But they outvoted me. They kept talking about the Melissa Witt case. And I know you don't know me very well, but I am nothing if I'm not passionate. And I was really passionate about not covering the Witt case because she had been found and she was deceased. This wasn't a missing person. But they outvoted me. They sent me to Fort Smith PD to meet with the folks there. And when I got there, the chief had arranged a meeting with the lead detective and a bunch of the retired detectives. And they really wanted to see this documentary made about her case. And I was pretty sold on it at that point, just to see the passion in that room. But then they took me out to the remote mountaintop where Melissa's body had been discovered in January of 95. And I'm telling you, I'd never been to a scene like that before. I'd never, I'm not a retired detective. I don't have that kind of a background. And I still get emotional thinking about it because the person that killed her just left Melissa out there in the woods like she didn't mean anything to anybody. And something just kind of clicked in me, that mom in me. I have 5 girls. I knew I had to advocate for her, and then the rest is history. I've poured almost a decade of my life into this case, and I spent almost 8 years making the documentary.
Amazing. And, you did a great job with it because I think from multiple aspects, it's really good. It's artistically well done. It's interesting. It keeps you involved. And beyond that, I'm watching it through the lens of my life experience. And I started taking notes. And I have to be a little bit careful just because I can go down this road and really get in a rabbit hole of, oh boy, I need to find, I can figure this out. I can do this. I can do that. That's not always the healthiest thing to do, especially, when it's halfway across the country or whatever. But with yours, I was captivated by that. You told a great story, and Melissa has a really interesting story and certainly deserves resolution.
And it's a solvable case. I mean, it truly is. It's a case that's captivated our state, and I really want to see her get justice. And, the unique thing that happened through this is that, I started off doing this documentary project, and then it really morphed into a partnership with retired detectives and the lead detective. They allowed me to see the case files. They allow me to contribute to the case, which is really, really unusual. That does not happen a lot. And so it was really important to me that I kept my word to the department on how we would tell the story in the documentary. Okay. The agreement was that I would just tell the story and I wouldn't put any kind of slant on who I thought it was or give anything away in that documentary that could jeopardize the case. That's always been something that's very important to me. And I feel like we accomplished that, especially for a self-funded, this independent first time documentary. It's something I'm really proud of. And I was just blown away when Amazon Prime picked it up. I mean, I'm just so happy for Melissa's case.
Yeah. Well, good. And you deserve all the credit in the world for that because, Amazon Prime would not have picked it up. I don't think, no matter how fascinating the story and how sad the story and all that, if you hadn't done the quality of work that you did, both in terms of, production and in terms of research, and you're right, it is unusual for, police departments to give that kind of access, and good for them. I think that's something that we should all think a lot more about. I think a lot of times you get caught up in, we're going to end up looking bad. We're going to end up looking like, we didn't do the work to solve the case. And it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way at all. That's ego. It's about the victim and trying to get it solved and getting it out there. If there's not active leads that you're pursuing and you have to protect the integrity of the case, which I understand that keenly. I worked on cases for years, one case more than 9 years, and it never really went cold because we had active, leads the entire time, and we were finally able to find the killer and get him charged. Cases like that's a little different, right? Because you need to protect the integrity of the case. But when you're kind of grasping at straws, which happens, I just did a podcast myself about a case girl that was stabbed to death in her apartment. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of that murder, and it was kind of handed down from generation to generation of detectives in the office where I worked, and I was the last guy to get it, and I don't want her to be forgot about. That's the type of case where there could be multiple people that did it, and I'm convinced there's somebody out there that knows something, and so let's talk about it. So good for you, and good for the Fort Smith Police Department for being so open.
And they had, and it wasn't like in the beginning that they just said, okay, well, here's the keys to the kingdom. You can have full access. It was really this very interesting dance between us because who was I? And, I'm just this rookie filmmaker at the time. And, we had to build trust. And really how that happened, it's pretty interesting because I had never planned to put my name to this case. I wanted to be behind the scenes, and it was never going to be LaDonna's going to write a book or put her name to the doc. I didn't even want to be in the doc, all of those things. But what happened is I gave an interview with one of the retired detectives to a local newspaper, and I had asked the newspaper not to include my name, just to call me a local, documentarian or filmmaker, whatever, but I didn't want to be included. So that Sunday when the article ran, the retired detective called me and he said, he calls me Humphrey. Humphrey, did you see the paper? I said, no, sir. He said, well, I'll be damned if they didn't put your name and a giant picture of you in this article. And I was really unnerved by that because in my experience in this line of work with missing persons and, missing and murdered, I'd gotten lots of strange letters from inmates, and you know how it goes. If you're
Sure.
So, but what happened out of that was interesting. About, I would say 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month after that article ran, it was very recent, I got a call in the middle of the night. And this man was crying when he called me. And he said, is this LaDonna Humphrey, the lady from the newspaper article? And he starts to talk about Melissa Witt. And he asks me to take him to the graveside. And the entire situation was very bizarre, and it set off all kinds of red flags for me. Mm-hmm. And I immediately called J.C. Ryder, who's the original lead detective. He's retired now on the case. And I said, hey, this person just called me. Who is he? And you could have just heard a pin drop when I said this guy's name. He said, well, this is the guy that we're looking at. and he won't talk to us. And this is interesting. You need to come in and talk to police. And so I did do that. And so they shared some information. And what the agreement was at that point is that because this guy was communicating with me, I agreed to go and work. I won't say undercover because I'm not an undercover agent, but I pretended to be this guy's friend for 7 years for law enforcement.
Good for you.
To gather information about him. And that really built a lot of trust with law enforcement because they knew pretty early on either I was going to go blab this guy's name or I was going to keep it to myself. And so I think that's what really was the linchpin to build the trust relationship that we have now. And I'm grateful for that. But that phone call pretty much changed everything for me because I've spent years investigating this guy and taking information to police and working with them. And I believe he's our guy. They believe he's our guy too.
And he over the course of that time period, he never really discussed it or gave information on it, or is that something that's best left for now?
What I can say is that he did discuss it and that we're going to be using that information, and we do use that information actively in the things that are happening now in the case. You know, he just talked too much. And in the book Connected by Fate, you know, I write about this guy. I take the book to the edge. Obviously, law enforcement read it. There were some things they asked me not to include, and I didn't. But I included enough information so the guy knows that it's about him, right? But the average person isn't going to pick it up and say, oh, this is so-and-so over at, you know, X Street in Arkansas, you know, because we don't necessarily want to deal with litigation, but it won't be a bad thing if he sues me. But I don't think he will. I never name him, but I give enough details that we're hoping that other people will come forward, including women that he's abused, and he's abused so many women. And but out of the course of all this, his old roommate came forward and said, hey, I was roommates with this guy, and he told me he was meeting Melissa Witt on the night that she disappeared. And not only that, he kept a female Mickey Mouse watch on display in his apartment. And that's the one thing about this case is that law enforcement believes that the killer stole Melissa's Mickey Mouse watch and kept it as some sort of memento of what happened. And this guy, our suspect, kept it out in the open in his apartment. We don't know it's the same watch, but we sure would like to get our hands on it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, hopefully they get enough together where they can get a search warrant, or he doesn't figure this out and get rid of it. But yeah, that's pretty captivating. So let's back up a second for my listeners who may be a bit confused. And
Sure.
if you really want to know the whole story, I highly recommend either one of your books. But the film is really fascinating. Again, it's Uneven Ground, the Melissa Witt story, and it kind of lays out the entire story, not so much of this particular suspect, but the story of what happened with her. But that basic story is she went to meet her. Melissa was what, 20? I can't remember. I didn't write this down. She was in her early 20s, right? 20.
She was 19, almost 20, yeah.
Oh, 19. Okay. And she went to meet her mother at a bowling alley one evening. Her mother's expecting her to show up there, right? And she does show up to the bowling alley in her vehicle, but she doesn't make it inside. And then her mother, later that night or the next morning, her mother is concerned, right, and reports to the police that she's missing. Am I telling that correct?
You are. You told it all correctly. Melissa's mom was concerned that night because she didn't come home, and she was calling friends. She drove the streets looking for her. I couldn't find her. This was not like Melissa. Her mom did not go back to the bowling alley because Melissa never came inside. Her mom assumed that she just never came to the bowling alley. You know, this was the 90s. You know, we didn't have all this true crime extravaganza like we have now. I don't know what else to call it. You know, we don't have all the true crime shows and documentaries and podcasts. And so her mom didn't know to go and look there. And so she came back home after driving around, and that next morning, first thing, she called the PD. They sent a patrolman out. And this is where the case kind of goes a little sideways from the beginning. the patrolman has to ask her, as he should, what did you have any kind of argument? She's 19, she's an adult, it's not illegal for her not to come home. And the mom said, yeah, we did have an argument yesterday morning over money. But it was just like any kind of argument you would have with your child over money. It wasn't anything that Melissa would have left over. But because she admitted to that argument, which she should have, which it was the truth, and because they see so many cases where people just get mad and leave or run away, the patrolman pretty much chalked it up to a runaway case. And this was also before the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had extended services to age 21. There was no crime scene, so to speak. They hadn't found her car. There was no reason to believe there was a commission of a crime. Nothing. And so that didn't set well with friends and family. They started putting out flyers on their own. They got media attention. And that's when the Major Crimes Unit said, hey, I've seen this on the news. Let me see this file. They get the file. They immediately on Sunday, so she goes missing on a Thursday night. They immediately go on Sunday to the bowling alley, and that's when they find her car. And then they know that they've got a problem because they found her car. And they find a crushed hair clip, an earring, and some blood splatter on the ground. And nothing like this had ever happened in Arkansas. Not like that. Not at the time. And so, once Major Crimes had boots on the ground and they had found their car, it was a full-scale effort to find Melissa. And they did everything they could. I mean, this was even before in Arkansas, before the sex offender registry was enacted, okay? And so they knew about sex offenders, and you know this because of your history with law enforcement. It's like, even before the registry, who's getting arrested, you kind of know who's on the street, who's doing what, those things. And so those are people that they went to. They interviewed hundreds of people. They did so much to find Melissa, and they were all devastated when 6 weeks later, 2 trappers in the Ozark National Forest, an hour away, found her body. It was shocking. It was not how they wanted the story to end.
Yeah, I'm sure. And just for my listeners, for sake of reference, when you're talking, her vehicle was found, and correct me if I'm wrong, LaDonna, but it was December 1st of 1994, correct?
So she went missing on December 1st, 1994. That was a Thursday. They found her car, I believe it was 3 days later. So it was on the 4th.
Okay. And then she was, her body was discovered January 13th of 95. So just 45 days later, approximately.
Right. And her body was an hour away from the initial crime scene. And I think your listeners might find this interesting. I mean, I do. I'm kind of a true crime geek, though. But, the crime scene there at the bowling alley was really disorganized. Really. I mean, it was like a blitz attack on her. Her keys were left behind in the parking lot. We can talk about that. The hair clip, the blood, all of it. And then you look at the scene, which they call the dump site in the Ozark National Forest, which is a long ways away. An hour is a long ways away.
Sure.
She was completely naked. They had taken, he had taken her shoes, her clothing, the rest of her jewelry, and there wasn't much there. And so by the time he got out to the Ozark National Forest, he had had time to think about what he was going to do and how he was going to cover up the crime. But I think he acted in a fit of rage when he was in the bowling alley parking lot. I don't think he had planned to murder her or to kidnap her.
Gotcha. And just again, for reference, there was blood found on the scene at the bowling alley near her car. But as you describe it in the film, the medical examiner determined not enough blood, probably that that was a fatal injury there. It was very likely she was alive when she was taken. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, she would have been knocked unconscious. The place where she was hit on her head, it was definitely determined by the medical examiner that it was not a fatal blow. And we do know that she died from strangulation, manual strangulation. She was strangled face down in the Ozark National Forest. And we know that because she inhaled debris and dirt from that forest, and it was found way down in her airway. And so they know that she died there and from strangulation.
So I got a quick question. I actually have so many like detective questions I'd love to ask, but now because you guys have a suspect that's pretty strongly in mind, I don't want to hurt the integrity of that investigation. So I'll try and tiptoe around that, and you just answer. You can say if you better not talk about that part.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
So I was a little confused with the ingestion of the native material to the Arkansas National Forest. That's really good work by a medical examiner and the forensic people later to determine that, which for listeners, that means she's killed there. The strangulation part of it, though, it sounds like maybe she's face down, that and this is just a technicality, but it was more like a forced asphyxiation than a strangulation. So what I'm getting at was that bone in her throat damaged, which is typical of digital strangulation, meaning somebody grabs somebody by the throat and chokes them to death. Usually that whatever that thoracic bone in the throat is broken or damaged.
Yes, the hyoid bone was broken. That was the only bone broken that she had, was the hyoid bone. So I imagine that he either had her like in a chokehold from behind, or potentially, there weren't any ligature marks. There wasn't any kind of, from what I can understand from the medical examiner's report, it was manual strangulation. So, it would have taken a lot of force from somebody to be able to strangle somebody from behind like that. So somebody was in a rage.
Yeah, sure. And some of these questions are better asked of the actual medical examiner, probably. But I think I understand. So she's face down. He chokes her to death. She ingests what is, like dirt, leaves, or whatever, and they're able to get that out of her system or her lungs. Ultimately, I'm trying to explain this for my listeners. And then they test that material. That's done probably by a crime lab, whoever works up the evidence. Like in Chicago, we send our evidence to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab, and they work it up. I don't know if it's Arkansas, if that's in Fort Smith. Do they send stuff do they use the Arkansas State Police Crime Lab, or do they have their own? Are you aware of that?
They use the Arkansas State Police Crime Lab.
Yeah, so their forensic people there at the Arkansas State Police Lab are able to determine that material is native to that Arkansas National Forest. Again, we're talking about an hour away, so that's pretty significant finding there, because you're talking about different native soil and plants or whatever. That's very cool, kind of Sherlock Holmes things, evidence that we don't see in a lot of murders, actually, that we're able to kind of determine with that kind of certainty, that kind of information. Like she died here, where she was found. That's really good work by everybody involved in that, protecting the scene by the detectives and the body, and then the medical examiner, obtaining that material during autopsy, and then the crime lab people making those comparisons and being able to make that determination to a point where it's probative, where they can get it into court and testify definitively, this is what we found based on these studies and that chain of kind of evidence. It's just really good work throughout the whole process. And I like to point that out, but unfortunately it doesn't always quite work that way for a lot of reasons. Not all of them are just, mistakes or cases not being handled properly. A lot of it's just the nature of the case and how quickly you get to the body and things like that. But that's just really good work.
I agree. I think they did some really stellar detective work. I agree with you on that. I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people don't recognize how significant that finding really is.
Yeah, it is, because, as I'm watching this and kind of taking notes, I'm like, well, all right, so there are kind of three things that I want to know. It's, again, you comment on this stuff or not, but when it's an active, just for my listeners and people who listen to my shows, hear this from me a lot, the integrity of an investigation and why that's so important. People get frustrated a lot. Well, how come the police don't release more information? Why don't they tell? Well, the main reason you don't do that from a detective's point of view, there's politics that go into all of that as well, but that's above the level of a homicide detective almost always. The reason that we don't want a lot of things released is we need to protect the integrity of the investigation, especially as it's active. There are things that like only the killer is going to know, and the more it's out there, the less you can count on the veracity of the information. So I always break it down simply: is information has more value if you hear it from the man. But if you hear it from the man who heard it from the man, has a little less value. And then the man who heard it from the man who heard it from the man, it has less and less all the time, right? So,
Right.
yeah, the better you protect that information that you know and have, the stronger the case is. But now that starts to become less of on the scale of what's important in an investigation, becomes less important when you don't have those answers and you're searching for them and you need help from the public and people like you. Then, you want to release more and more so that hopefully something strikes with somebody out there and makes a call and says, oh, look, I know this. And one of the things that struck me just watching your doc was there are points to that I'm sure the detectives were all over, and I would have been too, like, well, he's going to have known. There are points of contact there that not everybody are going to know, right? It's on that you describe really well that's a really remote spot that even though that Arkansas National Forest probably gets a lot of traffic from tourists and hunters and fishermen and all that stuff, she was in a particular spot, it sounds like, that it was pretty uncommon, right? That somebody would know that road.
Yeah, it would have been very difficult to find that location under the cover of night, get there, and then get back out. It's not easy to find at all. So it was definitely it's definitely believed by law enforcement that it was someone local to the area or someone that comes in to hunt, hike, or fish, and that kind of fit with the FBI profile that they gave of who they believe could be Melissa's killer, what those characteristics would be. And so, yeah, for sure. And for it to be such a long drive away too,
Yeah.
that says a lot about the person that's responsible too. I really attribute some of that to, again, I mentioned that it was very disorganized at the bowling alley. I think, in his disorganized state of mind at the time, he took that drive, perhaps going home, freaking out, trying to figure out what to do, and realized that he could not let her live.
Yeah, and so from my perspective, as I'm watching your film kind of play out, I'm thinking to myself and just again taking some notes. And by this time, you also know that you and I are going to have this conversation at some point. So I'm kind of doing two things at once here. One, the curiosity of my detective brain but I did think, well, this is for purposes of homicide detective. This is all good news because there are points of contact there that not everybody's going to have. You're going to start narrowing people down by the fact that, they know the route, they know the location where she's found, they have some familiarity with the bowling alley area, and it seems likely, but this is a little bit more of a flyer, that they had some familiarity with her movements, enough where they could get up close to her and have that kind of. There was a witness, right, that heard a conversation that I'd say best described as confrontational, but sounded the way that witness described it as sound like they knew each other in some way or another, right? They had some familiarity. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. It was, definitely something that police have believed all along, that it was somebody that knew her. And they have always believed that it was somebody that she had written about in her diary. And that diary is just a treasure trove of information. I've been able to read it. I've read it multiple times. Not only did I get an insight into who she was, which is a really unique opportunity, it's also very heartbreaking. Even me not being a detective, really, from the word go, really picked up on one particular person that was in that diary. And he just happened to be the guy that called me that night. And, I'm confident he's our guy. But with that said, I mean, that diary really does point a lot to why we think he showed up at the bowling alley that night. I don't think she wasn't giving him the time of day anymore. She was kind of done with him. He was a troubled young man, a womanizer on top of that. And I think he couldn't handle being told no. And when he went to the bowling alley that night to confront her and she rebuffed his advances again, I think he either hit her in the head or pushed her and she hit her head. It's one of those two things occurred. And then it just spiraled out of control. I don't think he ever intended to kill her. I don't believe that for a minute, because you wouldn't attack somebody openly in a crowded parking lot if that was your motive.
Yeah.
That's pretty brazen. So.
Right. I agree. And if he's listening, if he hears this or hears conversation read your book, look, he needs to get ahead of it. He needs to come in and talk about it and say, I didn't mean for this to happen, because if the detectives have to go find him, he'll never get that break again. So just the benefit of my experience there.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I just think he's so much of a narcissist, and it's been almost 3 decades. I think he feels like quite possibly he's gotten away with it, or that they don't have enough information, and he would be absolutely wrong. The past year has been really significant in the case. The police knew that my book was coming, on the heels of the film coming out last May. And, this was all designed to put so much pressure on him that, we hope he snaps. And I think he will. I think he's really close.
Good. I hope so. And again, like, if it played out the way you suspect, then he needs to get smart and try and get ahead of it. Might save himself some many, many years. But back to the story a little bit. The one thing I wanted to touch on that I think you did a great job on, you talked about a couple of serial killers who were in prison, Larry Ray Swearingen and Charles Ray Vines. How they always end up with these 3 names. And all the legit Rays in the world out there must be like, what the? But that's a really good angle that needed to be played out for the detectives, and you played that out really well in the documentary. But it seems unlikely, based on the circumstance to me, that she ended up a kind of a unfortunate victim of a happenstance run-in, you know what I mean? Unless there was some evidence she actually had some kind of relationship with one of these 2 guys, which didn't seem to be the case. It didn't make a lot of sense to me that they were the killer. But again, back to the point, that needed to be played out. You gotta check that out. I'm sure the detectives did, and so did you in your film, because that's an unopened question. And that's the type of thing, as you're building a case. Well, I should let you comment. Go ahead. You tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you are exactly right. Those 2 scenarios, you've got a serial killer, Charles Ray Vines, that was discovered in the area. So you got to look at him, right? Mm-hmm. And he was interviewed extensively, and felt like, he admitted to all of his crimes. This is what the determination of law enforcement was, that he had admitted to who he had killed. And he was really into old women and necrophilia, and he didn't snag people off the streets. He broke into their homes. It was a much different MO. And I think sometimes the public gets confused and they hear serial killer, well, it has to be him. Well, no, you've got to look at the MO. And I know sometimes they switch things up, but Charles Ray Vines had a real specific MO. I actually communicated with him before he died. Of course, they all say that they're innocent. He didn't. He admitted to the crimes that he committed, even to me, but he said he had no reason to withhold information if he had committed Melissa's murder. The one that looked really like he could be good for it was Larry Ray Swearingen. And that was because, 4 years, almost to the day of Melissa's murder, he actually kidnapped in Conroe, Texas, a girl named Melissa, who was 19 years old. And he drove her to the Sam Houston National Forest, and he strangled her. And he left her there. And there was a lot of reason to think that this could be Larry. He had grandparents in Arkansas. He was there at least 4 days before Melissa's death, about 2 hours away from Fort Smith. But police could never put him in Fort Smith. And I spent years of my life on that angle. Years of my life on that angle. And there's just nothing tying him to Melissa. Not a thing. We could be wrong, but he was executed, and we don't have those details now. We couldn't get them now if it was him. He took it to the grave. But it's just really unlikely that he was responsible for Melissa's murder.
Yeah, it seems unlikely, again, based on circumstance. I mean, that is a really strong coincidence, and, it certainly makes sense why you want to pursue that to its end as best you can to figure out, that the circumstances are so similar. But again, it just seems to me that you'd have to connect him more personally with Melissa for him to be a real suspect in that. Just the nature of it, you got to be really careful with your instincts, right? As a detective, it's like I can feel some way, but it's really about what I can prove. But my instinct with this is it doesn't seem like a one-off. It doesn't seem like, well, a guy like Larry Ray Swearingen happens to be in the parking lot, sees a victim and grabs her. It just doesn't seem like the nature of the totality of what to be evidence in this case,
Yeah,
But now
agree.
you can't get stuck on that. But I'm sure that they probably interviewed his cellmates. Well, he's on death row. He may not have had many cellmates in that Swearingen, but
They did before his execution, because he had 5 or 6 days, and it was in 2019, I believe, August 21st of 2019. I had spent months prior to his execution date. Every day I called, emailed, and faxed the folks down in Conroe, Texas, and saying, we need to interview Swearingen in the Witt case before he's executed. They got so tired of hearing from me that they called Fort Smith and they said, do you know who LaDonna Humphrey is? And they said, yes. And they said, would you please get her to stop contacting us? Come up here and talk to him. We'll set up a meeting with Swearingen. So they did that, which I'm so glad they did. He wouldn't talk to him, though. He ended up not talking to him, which added to the mystery. But all signs point to it wasn't this guy. We just, like I said, can't put him in Fort Smith. But it's most likely, as you mentioned before, someone that knew her routine, knew where she would be, someone that she had some sort of comfort level that she could even have any kind of back and forth disagreement with in a parking lot, right? Didn't sense any danger, and had no idea what the motives were of this guy, when he was angry. And it's most likely someone she knew. That's the way it is in 98% of the murder cases that, are worked. It's somebody that the victim knew.
Yeah, it mostly is. And that's why, it's, when women die, the nature of them is you need to talk to the people closest to them first. Now, and that can be, really traumatic and frustrating for family members and that, but it just, I think by now people understand that it kind of has to be done. But again, you can't let yourself get, kind of fixated on that. You kind of got to let the evidence go where it takes you. It sounds like they've done a fine job with that. I would, and I'm sure they're trying to do this as best they can since you guys have an active suspect in this, but I would do my very best to write Swearingen out definitively, which might be difficult to do, but I got a feeling you could come pretty close, because I wouldn't want to give the defense, that open door. I'm sure that they are on that.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you maybe offline about that. Some thoughts I have about that too, because I think that is important. And I've personally worked really hard I can place him within days of Melissa's murder. I mean, days. And like I said, I spent years tracking down his exes, women he had hurt. And it was typically women that he knew or had some sort of relationship with. But I think you're right. That would be a strategy of a defense attorney for sure. A good defense attorney.
Of course. Yeah, right. I mean, that's what I would do, right? It's an easy one to a jury.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can talk about that later. But so, and I know that you're on a hard out today because you've got family stuff to take care of. So I don't want to keep you from that. But in 50 minutes or so gone over this case, which you and the detectives have spent a great deal of your life on. I really encourage my listeners to watch your film, to read your books if you have interest in the case, because Melissa Witt and all of these victims deserve it. In my mind, keeping their names alive, trying to get justice, trying to get resolution to their cases. And you've done a really great job with that. And I appreciate it. I'm just kind of looking over my notes here. How about you, LaDonna? Do you have other things that we haven't covered that you think that we should?
No, I mean, I think it's important that Melissa gets justice. And I think a good way to do that is to educate yourself about the case. And, the Tubi just picked up the movie, the Tubi platform, which is huge, like Amazon,
Sure.
and you can watch it for free there. You can read the books for free on Kindle Unlimited. I've got a Facebook page for Who Killed Missy Witt. There's about 25,000 followers on that page. You get lots of great information on that page. I just encourage people to remember Melissa. Go check it out in whatever way you can and share the information, because you never know who you're going to share that information with that might have a tidbit of information to help us, seal the deal on this case. And that's really what I feel like my job is to keep her name and her face out in the public and the forefront of their mind, so they know that this 19-year-old girl still does not have justice, and she deserves it, and we've got to get it for her.
Yeah, and can't tell you how much I appreciate your work. I mean, it means a lot to me personally, because I dealt with the victims' families for so long that I understand. I was in a cold case homicide unit for 2 or 3 years here in Chicago Police Department, and looked at cases 50 years old, 60 years old, and the family members are still alive. Time stops when they die, when their loved one die. It really does, and it doesn't matter. It's 50 years later. It was a kind of painful thing to begin to understand as a young detective that it's not going to go away for them. It's not. And closure is a weird word. Finding out the killer, getting him convicted and all that, it closes that door, and it certainly gets them answers that they desperately need and justice for the victim. But it's not a magic wand that suddenly their life gets all full of joy. It just doesn't work that way. But that's the most important place to start, is to get answers. And you guys have done a fantastic job. Is any of Melissa's family still alive?
Yeah, so her parents have passed away, but she has 2 half siblings that are sisters, and they're much older. They're in their late 70s. They're alive. She's got, cousins and other relatives. In fact, one of them just reached out to me recently and said thank you for the work that I was doing to keep her case on the forefront. And so, yeah, they're still there. It's still very painful. It's like what you said, there's not anything you can do to bring Melissa back, and you can't take that pain away. But what we can do is make sure that this guy doesn't do it again. And that's by getting him off the street. And I think it would give the family so much peace of mind to know that he did not get away with stealing her life. And, one of the things that we did, because I'm in this weird position, I've spent almost 10 years of my life on this case, and now I have all this information about strangulation cases and cases like Melissa. So we started a nonprofit in her memory called All the Lost Girls. And, we're taking on new cases with that. And I really would love to extend an invitation to you to come be on that board and join us. We're doing a lot of good work, and I think you would be a huge contribution to that. And so we could talk about that offline too. But we want to continue with what we've learned and this army that we're building of people who care about these cold cases, so we can go apply what we've learned and what we've done with this case to other cases to help bring resolution.
Yeah, that's fantastic. First of all, I appreciate that offer, and I'm always willing to do whatever I can. So yes, we can talk about that. And I know we're about out of time here, but LaDonna, you and I will communicate. I will get all of these things that we've discussed in these groups that LaDonna is part of. I will have in the show notes for our listeners. I just want to say this real quickly. We got about 2 minutes, and we need to let LaDonna go. But I want to say like this. Everybody's interested, but you listen to these things because you're interested in true crime, like my daughter and people. And the question is, okay, so I'm in Chicago. interests me, this, Melissa Witt case. But really, am I going to go down that road? And why do I go down that road? Here's why, in my mind. If we can get resolution to Melissa Witt's case and get her killer charged, get him off the street, do all those things for the family, it's great. But more than that, they're like dominoes that fall. You got a case in your neighborhood in Chicago that's always bothered you, or you live in Florida or wherever it is, there's cases, or you've got family members or whatever. This is the way it works. You start with one, you get yourself involved, and you think about it, and you learn about it, and you help work towards it, you follow it, and you learn, oh, okay, I see what they did. I see what they did. And, oh, wait, this is true in this case that I'm thinking about. You know what I mean? It's a domino effect. We could solve a lot of these open murders out there, but it always starts with, with the one that's in front of you. And that's the way it works. So
Yeah.
it's critically important, and you're doing great work. And I know you got to go, but I'll let you close here real quick. And then to our listeners, LaDonna and I will talk further. And this won't be the last you hear about Melissa Witt or from LaDonna Humphrey. But go ahead.
Well, I just want to thank you again for having me as a guest today, and I want to thank your listeners. And I would just encourage your listeners just to take a moment of your day. Probably the easiest thing to do would be to go to our website at whokilledmissywitt.com. Just go to the website, go take a look at her picture, and maybe share some information on social media with the hashtag that we use, hashtag Justice for Melissa Witt. That has so much power in it. There's so much power in social media. And so I just think if people are moved, or they want to get involved, or they don't want this to happen to another young woman, if they'll just go take that 5 minutes, to go and visit the website, it would just make all the difference in the world. And do the same thing with other cases like you mentioned, Mike, in your own neighborhood, in your own backyard, in your own state. Do the same thing. There's just power in remembering those that we've lost. And it means so much to the family. It means so much to the detectives that are working the case, because they want people to remember too. These detectives, they get, and this, they're emotionally invested too. They want to make this right for the family. So I think
it doesn't go away.
It doesn't go away. But I do hope that you'll stay in touch with me. I'd really like to see you get involved with our nonprofit.
Yeah, of course. And I know you got to go, so I want to thank you personally. It's been an honor to talk to you and have you on our show. It really means a lot to me. Your work means a lot to me. As you said, the detectives, we get vested, and you try and keep it at arm's length, but it's hard, and you want answers, and it drives you, and it keeps you awake at night. So without all condescending out of it, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of those detectives there. It's great stuff. So I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. That kind of encouragement really keeps me on this path, because and I'll say this because I do have to hop off here, but I get a lot of support, but I also get a lot of criticism. People are like, why do you care? Why are you inserting yourself in this case? Why? They don't understand. And so I just try to drown out the noise and stay focused on the people who really understand and who want to also help make a difference for these cold cases. And I feel like you're one of those people, and I'm just thankful for what you do too. I mean, thanks for giving me this platform to be able to talk about the case.
My pleasure. Okay, then take care of your stuff. Good luck, and we will talk again soon.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Okay. So there you have it. The interview with the outstanding LaDonna Humphrey. I will have in the show notes here of all of her goings on, links to the documentary, the links to all of the Lost Girls Foundation, her podcast, all of that stuff I'll have for you in the show notes. So please check all that out. I really appreciate you guys checking in with us and being supportive. It means a lot to us when you subscribe and download and give us reviews. It really helps us out quite a bit and helps us move forward. I have some interviews scheduled still. All of them I hope you'll find of interest. But we're going to be moving back into the world of murder, specifically open murders, to try and get some traction with some of these cases, as we did with Becky Breedlove. Now, as a quick note here aside, I have talked with, this won't be the last time, very likely, that you hear from LaDonna Humphrey. We will hear from her again on this podcast. It appears to me like Melissa Witt's case has some traction. I think they're going to get resolution on that case, hopefully very soon. I've got a strong suspect that they're looking into, and I'm going to keep up to date with that myself, and I will let you know as that progresses. In terms of Detective Story, I want to expand into some murders that are out there that need resolution. I've got a couple of detectives I worked with who've got cases that they would like to see answers for. Kind of never goes away for us, and with these open cases, and put them out there hopefully for your interest and hopefully to continue their names and keep them alive and keep those cases alive. So we'll be moving in that direction as well. I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you're finding it interesting. So that's all for today. Again, I appreciate your involvement, and keep in mind that you don't have to just be a spectator with these things. I know they're interesting cases to read about, and I know that there's a lot of interest out there in true crime, and I really appreciate it. But I hope that you'll begin to see as we go down this road that you don't have to just be a spectator. There's work to be done, and if you have interest, there are things that you can do to help with some of these open cases. So that's all I got for today. I will talk to you very soon. We'll be back. Until then, watch out for yourself and watch out for each other. Take care.